podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to And It's Live, your new retro football network. I am Martyn Ramsey, your host. The following show, the main event, A History of the Champions League, was first recorded on the Heart and Hand Patreon network, so some references to other shows on that platform may not be relevant to you. Myself, Adam Thornton and David Edgar are all Rangers fans and often make the point during these shows that the Rangers' experience in the Champions League, often not a happy one, is covered elsewhere on that platform in great detail. Despite our own fan leanings, these shows are a wider view of one of the most transformative innovations in the history of the game. We look back as football fans first, as history geeks second, and with great love and interest in the subject. We hope that comes through the shows and that you in turn share that enthusiasm. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the main event, the Champions League history show here on Heart and Hand. The reigning champions of Europe in 1994-95 were of course AC Milan. They had won it 3 times and were in 2 other finals over the past 5 years. They were involved in Group D with another storied name but debutant in the Champions League series, Ajax of Amsterdam, along with Casino Salzburg and, of course, Rangers victors AEK Athens. They played in the opening game in Amsterdam, the young Dutch team winning 2-0. A shock, these things happen, but it was repeated on the final match day in Milan with another 2-0 win. Jari Litmanen scoring in both games, and this young team under Louis van Gaal looking very different and challenging indeed. We're here to discuss exactly how those two teams managed to meet again in the final in Vienna. I'm joined by Adam Thornton, who is shaping up for a lecture on Dutch football. How are we?
I'm good, thank you. What a quick week that was. Time flies when you're having fun.
It does indeed. You can hear Rob Smythe here. Manchester United are not involved anymore, but your input is still welcome. Rob, how are we?
I'm good, thank you.
And David Edgar is ready to relive some happy memories of 1995. How are we, David?
I'm good, yes, you're right, Student Union, 50 pence a pint, 30 pence a gin, watching Ajax, so I was going to say some good memories, but I don't remember an awful lot about it, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to hear Adam wax lyrical about a Cruyff team that isn't managed by Johan Cruyff.
Well, amen to that. Before we get there, Adam, can we pick up kind of where we left off, which we were waxing lyrical about Paris Saint-Germain, who just were phenomenal. They were so effervescent and free, scoring lots of goals, winning just about every single game, certainly all the group games, the disposing of Barcelona in their quarterfinals, Bayern in the group. They then meet this Milan team under Capello, who get out there eventually, get out of the group, not quite looking like the side that was so incredible in Athens in that final. Doing a very Milan job on Benfica in the quarterfinals, and therefore this semi-final was kind of billed as the unstoppable force, immovable object, etc., etc. Looking back at the semi-final, or certainly the first leg in Paris, I wonder what your thoughts are, because it just looks all of a sudden like a very Milan game. It isn't like a lot of the PSG games that I'd watched in the group and against Barcelona. It's stop-start. There's not a lot of clear-cut chances. It's from range. They're kind of forced to the margins a wee bit. And in the 90th minute, an absolute sucker punch when Boban finds himself in space, manages to squeeze away a shot. They win. It's an away goal, never mind a lead. And the game in Milan is done kind of early. Savicevic scores one, he scores another later on. And is this romance just hitting pragmatism again, a wee bit like the final in Athens a few months before?
Yeah, they get Capello'd in that first game. I think for want of a better phrase. And yeah, the late goal, Boban, 91st minute, or certainly stoppage time. Taking a 1-0 lead back to San Siro at this point with that manager and that defence, I think is a pretty big ask for every team. Savicevic, you mentioned, great in this game. Two really good goals, I think, overall here. You obviously missed the final, which we'll come on to, which is a really big miss, actually, when you think just how that plays out and what Ajax did to them in that final. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. I think they were daunted. There's an interview where George Weah a couple of months later where he said as soon as they got AC Milan, there was a bit of fear and nervousness taking over the team. I think it's easy to forget, even though it's a team like PSG and you think, oh, they're this and that, sort of first foray into the Champions League playing against a team that have been one of the two dominant forces for the last 6, 7, 8 years, is going to be a little bit daunting, I think, at this stage. I also think as well, they're well off the pace in the league at this point. Nantes are absolutely flying. Patrice Loco ripping it up, so much so that PSG would then go and buy him to replace Weah, obviously going to Milan, like we said last week. I just think it's difficult sometimes, obviously, when we mentioned there the difference between league and continental competition, but more so when you're then off the pace at the weekends to then raise your game quite significantly. In the midweeks, I think it maybe just started to get the better of them a little bit. And Rai missed the second leg as well. Now, number 10 away from home maybe isn't going to be exactly what they need. But yeah, I think there was maybe just 2 or 3 things that just fell on the fine margins for them in this game. Also, as much as we wax lyrical about Weah, 6 of his 7 goals are in the groups, and then he gets one against Barcelona, and then nothing really for 2 or 3 games there. So I think when you've got that talismanic a figure, and he then stops scoring those goals and doing those runs and being that sort of one-man attack, then you're going to struggle.
But David, they just weren't allowed. I mean, they were just closed down by the greatest defence of all time. I mean, I did, as we've discussed, I did love Milan in those days a lot. But as we discussed last week, it's just, PSG were exciting, and it would, I think, slightly tinged by disappointment here, in my house anyway, just seeing that being extinguished so kind of brutally, because the game just never got going at all.
Yeah, modern Martyn would have loved to see
it
extinguished that brutally. Martyn. Adam sort of touched upon the aura of this Milan side, and I found it very interesting when he said that PSG actually spoke about that beforehand, because there was this incredible reputation around this side. And when you look at how they do this, though, this is experience, this is know-how, all the things we talked about last week that British clubs, Manchester United specifically, were lacking. This is exactly it. It's playing your game, isn't it? It's going out there and saying, if this goes to be a toe-to-toe game, then they have a very good chance. If we go out there and absolutely shut them down, they don't. Interesting what Adam was saying about George Weah there. Again, he's a player on the way up, and not the first player we've seen, and certainly won't be the last, that has a wonderful autumn and maybe tails off a little bit later in the season. But yeah, I actually thought at the time PSG would beat them, which I'd got carried away. And it sounds as though I'd got more carried away than the PSG team had got about it. But Milan tactically nailed absolutely everything. And PSG, when you're a free-spirited side, if you don't have the confidence in yourself to play that way and you feel that you're being shut down, you really are inhibited, and that's exactly what happened in this tie.
In that second leg in Milan, David, the referee was Leslie Mottram. Thankfully, the goals in the San Siro were not quite as baggy and as huge as they were in the United States, but certainly less tight than at Firhill. So no goals were lost.
Phantom goals in a big match. The best thing about that phantom goal at Partick, by the way, isn't the fact that he misses that it's gone in and come back out. It's the fact that a Dundee United player picks it up and throws it back to the halfway line for kickoff, and he didn't think, well, that might be a penalty. Wonderful moment.
Rob, interesting they're talking about PSG's they're being in awe of Milan because, Ajax had kind of handily taken them apart twice. A young Ajax team. If you were being completely cool and calculated about it, say, well, this isn't what they once were. However, they had maybe shown signs of a kind of slow start in 93, 94, and then sprung into life against Monaco in that semi-final. And maybe, I don't know if that's in the back of the mind that, right, business end of the season, this has been by far the best club in Europe over the past 5-6 years. They're just going to turn up and do the biz. But it's how the old ghosts sometimes are more dominant than stats and particular preparation about the actual reality of the task at hand.
Yeah, and I think there's something uniquely formidable about a great team who have had a really shit spell and then stir again. You think, oh, Jesus. And it happens a lot actually with Man City at the moment, not quite as bad as Milan were in the first half of the season, but it's almost more formidable than it would be had they been at that level all season. You just feel like everything is clicking into place, business end of the season. The other thing is they'd stopped conceding, hadn't they? Certainly in Europe. I think after this tie, so the first leg, it feels like the first leg is the one, isn't it? Once that's done, even 0-0's not enough for PSG, really. So at that stage, that's 4 clean sheets in a row, I think, in Europe for Milan, 5 after the second leg. But yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? What determines whether that aura impacts? Ajax clearly didn't give a shit, did they? Does that come from Van Gaal? Does that come from Van Gaal? Does that come from
and youth?
Dutch? But yeah, exactly. A Dutch culture. I don't know. But I find that really interesting. It's the same with, you see it in so many sports, 2 equally talented players, but one, I was just thinking, like, often my mind goes back to cricket, but just think of Kevin Peterson in the 2005 Ashes, walks to face McGrath and Moore and just thinks, I can give a fuck. You're going back over your head for 6. An equally talented player might not have that kind of audacity, and, it all pans out really differently. So I don't know, it's interesting, but you're right. I didn't know that Ware quote, but it kind of makes sense with everything I've read and seen of the ties, that they were just slightly in awe. And, in fairness, Milan had kind of earned their aura, hadn't they, over the
absolutely. And there's still some names in that team sheet are just kind of terrifying.
Yeah, but I do think it's so scary when a great team, when they start rousing themselves, you think, oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah. It's always like the whole kind of horror movie thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
The baddie you can't put away.
Yeah, well, we saw it last year in England with Arsenal. Arsenal saw this monster lumbering up in the background, and the bottle completely went. I think you're absolutely right, Rob, when you mentioned Dutch culture there. I think that it's telling that we've seen since then young Dutch teams come through and play with that freedom and fearlessness. And I think a big part of it is that attitude of, well, it doesn't really matter what they do. We know we're really good.
Yeah.
And we'll go out and do that.
Exactly.
It's maybe, if you like, even a self-centeredness. It's not about them; it's about us. And yeah, you're right. But again, to back up a third point you made there, Milan had earned this, and Martyn mentioned there. A look at that team sheet, especially for an attacker who maybe doesn't feel he's quite on his game, is going to put a little bit.
When am I getting space tonight?
Yeah.
I mean, it should be mentioned. Milan finished 4th.
Yes.
In Serie A.
Albeit much better second half of the season, though.
Yeah. But the damage had been done. Juve won by 10 points or something from Lazio. I think Parma were in the mix as well. But again, domestic travails and European success are often 2 very, very different things. You can house them in the one season, as teams have shown. But Milan were in the final, where they would meet, of course, again, Ajax. They had to deal with who did they have to deal with actually in the quarterfinals now? Just for no, it's Ajax split. They got a kind of weird or an easier draw in that quarter, but they drew 0-0 in Croatia, won 3-0 in Amsterdam, and then Bayern Munich, Holland, Germany. Yet again, another chapter of this long tale, 0-0 in Bavaria, and then an absolute hammering in Amsterdam. Adam, it was 1-1 at one point. It would end up 5-2 to Ajax. They were just sensational. and I think it's probably fair to say up for it. Would we probably surmise that they were kind of well motivated and goals being spread out? We'll talk about that a wee bit later on when we get to the final. But this was kind of one of those seminal moments in European Cup football where it's wow, okay, this is an absolute arrival. Two huge names. They've won it, I think, 3 times each, perhaps at this point. I think they handed over a hat trick to one another in the 1970s. But this is awesome. How is this team put together, Adam? Because you've got Dutch youngsters and you've got some good recruitment, I suppose, from Africa and from Scandinavia. How did Ajax put it together? What role did Van Gaal have in directing that?
So let's come back. We'll come back to the semi-final then, because I think it's a really interesting game, and as dull as the first leg was, the second absolutely isn't. But it was one each, and there's also another moment later on that could have been a bit of a sliding doors moment, but we'll come back to it. So let's start then with Ajax, I guess. Yeah, considered one of the greatest teams ever. They won Eredivisie undefeated this season. 6 or 7 draws, I think it was. They only lost 1 game all season, which was in the cup to Feyenoord, which they were very much not happy about, as you can imagine. They are, I think, as at current standing, the only team ever to go unbeaten in the league and win the Champions League in the same year. Yeah. So when you think about the context of all of that, as well as the age, like you said, the starting 11 in the final, I think average age of 24, and then the 2 subs that come on, Canu and Kluivert, are 18. So when you think about it in that context,
to say that opponents were slightly older in terms of an average age, would we say?
Just a little bit, yeah. We're Brazil and Costa Rica older than both of those players individually at this point. I'm not sure, but they couldn't have been far off it. Van Gaal is really interesting because he is a divergence from Cruyff. They were both disciples of Rinus Michels, but also polar opposites. But you know that way where you become so convinced you're a polar opposite, you end up coming a little bit full circle, and there are some things that you can link back. So system over players, always something which I'm a big fan of. No doubt with Van Gaal, it was just, this is what's happening. This is the team. Repetition of movements, and not only repetition of movements in terms of patterns of play, but to the nth degree. He would go to, for example, if Overmars is 1-on-1 on the final third, then fine, go and take him on. If you're not 1-on-1 and there's 2 players there, you must pass infield. There is no debate. If you don't pass infield, you are in big fucking trouble. Which I thought was really, really interesting. Watching it back, Ronald de Boer, a really interesting quote. There's a lot of Ronald de Boer chat running about this time. I really want to focus on that because I find it quite interesting based on the Ronald de Boer that we seen at Rangers. And it's easy to say, oh yeah, he played for Ajax and Barcelona, and now he's at Rangers at 30, and there's maybe a little bit of a over the hillness about that. He's coming to Rangers at that point. I think sometimes in my memory that does a bit of a disservice as to just how good he was. So come on to him. But he says Van Gaal was repetition. Even with Frank de Boer, he'd won everything in the game, but he actually apparently had quite a poor left foot at this point, and he's 24, 25. Frank de Boer had a poor left foot apparently at this point. Couldn't hit a straight ball. Van Gaal did a passing drill with him every day as an extension of the warm-up. And he's like, oh, this again. And after 3 months, he says, ping, ping, ping. Frank's left foot was absolutely perfect. So he was huge on repetition. Pioneer of data and opposition analysis before, again, we'll come on to 10 years later, Mourinho and Benitez being massive on this. And he was big on, like you said, systems over stars, but team cohesion, I think, first of all, was the big thing. So I think that's the key for me. I think about this is the team gets broken up, absolutely. The Bosman ruling kills it, as we'll come on to in future episodes. But it's just a great team. I think we can come on to the players, etc. But I think it's really important, like you said, just to have a look at where it came from. They won. He joined them in 1991, I think it was, won the UEFA Cup in his first season. Year by year improvement. Youth players, and like you mentioned, great scouting. Overmars coming in. Fanini George and Wanka Kanu come straight from Nigeria, which is quite a rarity.
No one was going
at
there
that
at
time.
I presume.
No, Litmanen coming straight from Finland as well, from Maipa, straight into Ajax and just ready to go. Here we go. So it's great scouting. And interestingly, in this season, they didn't sign anyone in the summer. Nothing. In that summer, and it's your first foray into the Champions League, and you're like, no, we're good, and obviously they are good at this point. And obviously, I'm sure, like most people around about Europe at this time, they actually wanted Ronaldo to complete the team, even at, what was he, 17 at this point? And Van Gaal actually said, because PSV had the contacts due to Philips being quite a big company in Brazil, that was how they managed to get him instead. Van Gaal, obviously with his usual humility, said, don't need Ronaldo. We've got Patrick Kluivert, and I think was roundly mocked at this point, which, to be fair, is probably quite a bit to put on an 18-year-old who hasn't played a competitive game yet. And then obviously Patrick Kluivert's first game, he only goes and scores the winning goal in the Super Cup final at 18 years of age. So he was probably right. So we can come on and look at it step by step. But yeah, I'd be keen to get maybe Rob's thoughts, I guess, on Ajax at this point as well. Like someone who's maybe that little bit older and has seen some of the sort of clubs there. Did they just appear as everyone seems they appear, fully formed, or were you sort of aware of their progression at this point?
So yeah, but kind of stage of life I was in terms of watching football, I actually wasn't particularly aware of them at all, really. The first time was when they beat Milan in the group stage. How normal that was, I don't know. I was trying to think back about this, how much my friends and I would have spoken about foreign football. Well, probably wasn't a huge amount. Like, I was reasonably interested. I was obsessed with Serie A for a little while, actually before it went on Channel 4 in England, so it was on Sky. But no, I wouldn't have known a huge amount. It was more just literally just seeing a result and thinking, geez, Milan, I think was it 2-0 they beat them the first game?
Oh, 2-0 both games, yeah.
Yeah.
I would have...
so I wouldn't have known much at all beyond that. I wouldn't have known... I don't think... I'd have known a bit about Overmars played at USN 82. In fact, no, of course I've known Overmars because he was one of the main reasons England didn't play at USN 84. But,
that's right.
And ruined Des Walker's career. But no, beyond that, not much really at all.
Need parts now? O'ReillyAuto.com offers in-store pickup, same-day home delivery, or next-day home shipping. Get more parts your way at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Yeah.
I did that because of my dad. My dad loved that Holland team, or that Netherlands team, if we would be absolutely correct, in 74, and the Ajax team from 71 to 73. And Cruyff and all that. He, as a teenager, he bought very much into that. So he would have said, wow, right, they're back at the top level, because they'd been out for a while. They had been out for a while. It really was PSV and really just them, to be honest. And they won it in 88, and it had kind of been that Dutch representative for quite a while. So this was that, right, look out for them. Now, that's purely on his nostalgia. He was not... What you watch out for the Nigerian boy they've got up front or anything like that. He did not have a clue about what was actually transpiring through there. But the name, and it meant a lot to him to see them back at the Champions League, the top level. So I think there's quite a fair bit of that second wave that I'd loved Mikel's and that original Dutch revolution, that we're happy to see them back.
Yeah, there was also a fair amount of talk about them because they had a couple of 8-0s domestically, a 7-0 and several 5s, and people were like, "No, Jesus Christ!" You know, as Rob says, you just saw the result. You didn't necessarily see the game, but there was some chat about this side who were putting in absolute pastings on a weekly basis, and again, the mythology started up, and they're all about 13, the players. So there was a lot. There was a lot of that without seeing them, but it was only when we saw them against Milan it was like, all right, aye, here we go.
And again, Adam, USA 94 is for the casual viewer, it's huge because the Netherlands had a good old tournament, unfortunately against Brazil in the quarterfinals, blah, blah, blah. And so some of these names are now familiar. Bergkamp's no longer there. Of course, he's gone to Inter, but we know he's come from Ajax. And it's just, it was still, probably for the last time, I'm not sure France 98 revealed anyone to anyone really. Like, we kind of knew who was who because you've had 5 years of the Champions League by this point. But it's that again would have set us up for we're keen to watch Ajax because we've really enjoyed watching the Netherlands, not least their last 16 game, but just in general. Rob, sorry.
So this is what I really like about it though, because you look at that World Cup 94 squad, and you've got Frank de Boer, you've got Ronald de Boer, you've got Frank Rijkaard, who of course came back and missed the Milan Champions League win the year before, and then makes up for it this year. But then you've got Bergkamp, Wim Jonk, Brian Roy. The first two left. Van Gaal sold Brian Roy, said he wasn't clever enough to do what I want him to do, basically. And he got
seen
shot.
him at Forest, he was right.
Let him go to England. He'll fit in well.
I know,
He go to England and run about quickly. He was a rocket. I mean, the boy could move, but no way was he good enough to play for that Ajax team.
But I just think it's just really, looking back at it, you're like, oh yeah, that's obvious. But I mean, getting rid of Wim Jonk and Dennis Bergkamp and replacing them with, I guess it's Davids and Jari Litmanen. You'd be like, what's going on here? This is a bit strange, especially when Davids is as young as he was. So yeah, I think I've spoken a fair bit about the back pass rule in terms of the changes and how significant that is for me in modern football from 1992. We spoke a little bit about Sebastiano Rossi, and it was like, oh, this is great. You can Edwin van der Sar looking back at this. I mean, it's so interesting because obviously, Rob, you'll see him at the end of his career at United, but he is ridiculous on the ball in these early days. It was actually, we spoke about this, Martin. It's actually coached out of him when he went to Juventus. Yeah. They were like, "What the fuck are you doing? Get back on that line. This is Serie A, pal." They wanted them to stay there, and his consensus obviously have not been delighted at being there anyway. But was probably why he had such a poor time there, because he had to completely change what he was. He was a big keeper. He had a big frame, but he loved coming out to collect that ball and sweep it. And there's a point in that semi-final that we can talk about. Really good positionally, good reflexes, great shot stopper. Basically, full package at 24, which is really, really easy to forget when you're talking about how young goalkeepers, how old goalkeepers are before they can sometimes mature. So at this stage, he's up there. And I think a lot of people maybe think, again, probably younger people think Neuer is the first high-profile keeper to play like this, but he actually says Van der Sar is the big influence. He said, I do not think I was the main protagonist. One of the very first to have brought a new perspective was Edwin van der Sar. He played a lot with his feet and allowed the position to enter a new phase. I was inspired by his style of play. So that was key, and I think that wasn't something we've really seen. You go back to the Hungarian teams of the 50s, and you had Grosic doing it a little bit. I guess you could class Bruce Grobbelaar as someone that would come out a little bit in the 80s, but genuinely, it was not something that happened. We had Barthez as well, maybe not as well known despite the Marseille piece. So having that type of goalkeeper enabled them to do some really, really interesting things. They used the 3-4-3 similar, I guess, to some of the things that Cruyff was doing. But Van Gaal was a little bit more interesting, I guess, about his defence. And Martyn, I'm keen to get your thoughts on, I guess, your understanding of this. So he had wide centre backs, so similar to remember what Gasperini did at Milan. David, you remember this about 15 years ago, where he basically played maybe Materazzi in the middle. I can't quite remember, and then he had two fullbacks basically at either side, and it worked for Atalanta, but it did not work for Inter, and he got absolutely ripped apart. Not really the case here. He had the wide centre backs. It was Frank de Boer on one side and Michael Reisiger on the other side. So again, Martyn, not a million miles away from what we saw with Cruyff in the '92 final, where he had Albert Ferrer sort of playing that Michael Reisiger role. I guess if I want to coin a new phrase, a fullback and a half, maybe what Kyle Walker was doing for a few years under Pep as well. So that was just these type of players, just these type of managers doing this. That you wouldn't have got an Italian team doing this at this stage. I imagine. Am I missing someone?
No, I think you're right. Which again goes back to you mentioned the '92 final and this '95 final. The Rinus Michels heritage. Then they might have done different things with it, but they're still looking at similar kind of templates, similar kind of ideas. Yeah. And again, where Ajax would have appealed to so many neutrals was because we're kind of done with Milan. We're kind of done with that Italian way, kind of dominating this competition, European football. Like, it's coming back next final. Don't worry about it, lads. But that antidote to that is I guess kind of appealing, and it's not the norm, and we're going to try to do something different. But how did it differ then from Cruyff? Because setting out looks similar-ish, but what's Van Gaal doing that Cruyff would have rejected or would have been pissed off? Because he may have been kind of done as a force as a manager, but he would be rent a quote for the next 15 years, I think.
So it's actually, I think, really similar to what Guardiola started when he moved to Bayern and probably is now perfecting at Man City. Now, obviously, Van Gaal was at Bayern as well, and Guardiola's carrying on from there. So I think it's really interesting. I think Danny Blin and Frank Rijkaard were the middle two, if you like, and they were the veterans of a very, very young team. Like we said, they probably brought the average age up by about 4 points on this. And again, to continue that theme, they sort of played a similar kind of role to Koeman and Guardiola. Absolutely not in terms of the goal output or anything, but sort of centre halves and defensive mids at points, not quite just sweepers. The big difference, it was just this complete width. Two absolute wingers in Overmars and Fanini George. As mentioned, he was still doing it 20 years later at Bayern with Ribery and Robin, who you all know I absolutely love.
They didn't have real pacemakers, did they? They would kind of toy, bang, and it was a speed of pass, it was speed of thought that made them so kind of devastating, rather than
Stoichkov, Linus. It's clever players that are playing out wide rather than being Overmars and Fanini George. So I think that's the big difference there. Definitely for me. De Boer, Ronald De Boer or Kluivert as the striker. I guess usually, obviously, it's Kluivert's first season, so there is a fair bit of interchange in there, and Ronald De Boer plays a fair amount. And then I guess that concept of the second striker, like you said, Bergkamp was the number 10 for Ajax. He was the first shadow striker, I think, if we want to call it that. And he played that perfectly, really, offering that link between midfield and attack. Litmanen comes in and is fantastic, just picks up the mantle right away. So I think that's the big difference. And if you were to push me, I would say this style is probably as close to perfect for me as it can get. You've got the talented players who can pass out for the back. You've got pressers and passers in the middle. Davids and Seedorf are 21 and 18, and they're not just shuttlers, but certainly shuttlers, overloading the midfield, controlling the space, lots and lots of energy. In the middle of the park, you've got two absolute top-class wingers with a number 10 behind a perfect striker as Kluivert would go on to be. They can all rotate positions Sometimes they're not allowed to, which I quite like as well. They're not afraid to keep the ball, but not for no reason. They can also mix it up. They play fast. They play direct. They've got a lot of goals in them. I just really love the balance of it all. And watching some of these games back, there's a lot of set pieces. There's a lot of corners. Frank de Boer scores a fair amount of free kicks. They've got a little set piece play where it's Frank de Boer at the near post. I think he scores in the Ajax game. Maybe he scores a couple of near post wins. There's also a sort of near post flick on by Frank de Boer to Ronald de Boer at the back post. So there's a lot of that. It's no stones left unturned. There's a team that can play, a team that can fight, a team that has wingers, and a team that are decent in set pieces. If I'm being a wee bit critical, the only thing really missing here, I guess, is even just one sort of attacking fullback, something I like. The fullbacks would support, but they wouldn't get into the final third as much. They actually, no surprise, were not allowed to overlap.
So
no way.
Yeah. Two purists then, and Cruyff and Van Gaal would come for that, Mikos. But was Van Gaal's purity then more, this is how I want you to play, and therefore it's a lot more rigid, whereas Cruyff and something like that Netherlands team, you talking about total football, it is rotation. You should be expected to move around and do this and do that, whereas Van Gaal's far more of a director rather than the kind of philosopher king. He does have a very clear idea, but it's his idea, and too much variance from that won't really be tolerated. You're just talking about, no, you're not allowed to run past this mark. So that's
absolutely
Saki about.
Yeah, well, they were, come as no surprise, Van Gaal and Advocat were teachers in an earlier iteration of their life, and I think you can certainly see that. So yeah, there are Saki similarities. Van Gaal's whole philosophy was about creating space for those wingers. Give me a solid defensive base to guard against counter-attacks, which he had with those sort of three centre halves, if you like, and a sitter and Frank Rijkaard. They could also play a high line because, as we said at the start there, Van der Sar just coming out and sweeping, which I guess brings it back then to that semi-final. So I watched this whole game, and it was fantastic. Frank de Boer was suspended. I think he said he was quite happy to be suspended because he thought we were definitely going to get to the final, and I'm happy I'm missing this one rather than the final. And all of that stuff I've just spoken about, they absolutely annihilated Bayern, hounding them all over the pitch. There's a couple of clips where Edgar Davies is just like that pit bull, just following. I think it's Donadoni about and just snapping at his heels and dominating them, which is ridiculous. But like I said, I was really surprised about Ronald de Boer. And David, I'm keen to get your thoughts on that because, like I said, I don't know if it's just my perception, but Ronald de Boer is one of the best players in the team. Like he's absolutely fantastic, and obviously now it's Davids and Seedorf get a lot more plaudits. They won a lot more. Ronald de Boer is 5 years older than him at this stage. But I guess what were your thoughts on Ronald de Boer at this point? Because for me, I sort of had him in my head as squad player at Ajax, maybe squad player at Barcelona, but he's unbelievable.
No, Ajax. No, I never had him as that. I always had him as one of the important ones in the team. Barca, he kind of went and lost his way a bit. That was a weird era at Barca where they had, the Dutch national team, or basically they had this Ajax team and Boudewijn Zenden, it felt like. But yeah, I loved this side so much. As you say, it was perfect balance. Everybody seemed to have a job, but it didn't seem to matter what sides came up with against them. They found ways round it. They were good at all sorts of things. But the other thing about it is you didn't get a lot of out-and-out passing teams in the UK at the time. You had, the way we played, we were very physical and, we got the ball forward quickly. You had United who got the ball forward quickly in a different way. They had, the electric wingers down south. You had Arsenal who were no strangers to a punt up the park. Liverpool were kind of nothing. They spoke a lot about their passing game, Liverpool, but it seemed like a relic from the past. Here was a side who were moving the ball at pace. They always seemed to have runners. They had movement. They seem to be playing in sync. And we spoke last week, 2 weeks ago, we spoke about this was really the beginning, certainly for me and a lot of people my age, of the understanding that you could be dangerous when you didn't have the ball. mean, that was an absolutely alien concept in the UK. It just had never been discussed that I can recall growing up. And suddenly they were pressing and they were hunting in packs, and there was all these things that just hadn't really factored into our, because we the Corinthian spirit, Martyn, you'll remember, you go out and everybody chases after the ball and one of you wins. And suddenly this was so involved. And I think also there's also the sense of the coach as director is happening now. We spoke about it with Capello. You're now seeing it with Van Gaal. Well, the coach seems almost as an integral part of this as the players themselves. But no, when Rangers, for example, signed De Boer, I still remember to this day seeing it on the Evening Times bulletin board and being absolutely, like, just genuinely stopping in the street, being so happy with the news, because I absolutely loved him. I thought he was a terrific player. And that's what I mean about this Ajax team, that they all were important components. And it's probably one of the first teams, Milan maybe another example, but this was one of the teams where you knew all 11 names. You knew who played where, rather than it just being a kind of faceless side with a couple of stars. It was a team, and you knew where they all went.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. Rob, you had your hand up about 20 minutes ago.
No, it's to ask Adam a couple of questions. So, in the system they had, who do you think was the most irreplaceable at that particular point in time?
I think it's a tricky one, because I'm torn between Frank Rijkaard and Overmars, to be honest.
That's interesting, actually. I was going to ask you about the impact of Overmars' injury in the following season. But Rijkaard was the first one who came to mind. You'll have seen a lot more games. Yeah, just because of the way they can adjust. And with that in mind, did any team, because I was just looking at their defensive record is really good, isn't it? Did any teams get at them, particularly in wide areas? For example, weirdly, United might have conceded 10, but with Giggs and Kanchelskis, would they potentially have caused Ajax more problems than a team like Milan, whose midfield was reasonably narrow? I know they had Donadoni.
Yeah. No, well, they did, but the way that Milan played there, they had Donadoni and Boban very, very narrow in the final, as we'll come on to. It was a narrow diamond rather than an old-fashioned diamond, if you like. So,
but isn't that the way? You've got Winston Bogard as the left-sided centre-back, which I think he was in one of the games anyway. Because Bayern didn't have any decent wingers, did they, at the time?
No. So I think that's...
I know it's slightly simplistic, but I'd be interested to know, did any team domestically even get at them? Or it looks like they obviously didn't lose a game. So
yeah, no, I think they were just so streets ahead at this point. PSV are sort of going through, I guess, their post-Romario phase at the minute. They haven't quite got Luke Nellis at this point, I don't think. So there was... neither of them are necessarily going to speed away from Ajax, but I think what they did was just that balance and that structure. Frank Rijkaard was almost like their cheat code there. He would sit back visibly. You could see him sitting back. They would, like I said, it wasn't all out attacking fullbacks, so they had 4 behind the ball most times. And if you think any team coming up to sort of counter attack, it's going to get into trouble when it's 4 like the 4 they had. So it was a little bit perfect in that time. But for me, Rijkaard, more so than Danny Blind, I got the impression watching it that Rijkaard was the grown up in the room, if you like, and he was the one with his hand on the tiller to say, like, this is when we go, this is when we stop. So I think he helped massively in these 2 years that he was there,
and that flexibility gives you as well. So
exactly, you can go back 4 in transitions. You can,
No, you're right. It's such a nice system. If you've got the players who can play it.
Not a lot of British about this Ajax team, Adam, but looking at the quarterfinal and semi-final, away first both times, there's quite a British attitude to away goals. Don't need them. 0-0's fine because we'll gub them back home, and that's going to disappear a wee bit. Teams are going to need that away goal. 2-1 defeat even is absolutely fine. 1-1's absolutely brilliant. But nah, just get them back. We fear nothing at home. So the final in Vienna, I made this point in Dominant, and I'll kind of reiterate it. I'll just read these teams out. Van der Sar, Michael Reisiger, Danny Blind, Frank Rijkaard, Frank de Boer, Clarence Seedorf, Fanini George, Edgar Davids, Ronald de Boer, Jari Litmanen, and Mark Overmars, with Kanu and Kluivert coming off the bench. For Milan, Rossi, Christian Panucci, Paolo Maldini, Dimitri Albertini, Alessandro Costa Curta, Franco Baresi, Roberto Donadoni, Marcel Desailly, Daniele Massaro, Zvonimir Boban, Marco Simeone, and Ranio and Lentini coming on. There's not a weak position in any of those two lineups. I think I said this in Dominant. I would reiterate it. I think that's the best European Cup final team sheet I've ever seen. And what is also the takeaway, I think David kind of hinted at it earlier, is that this is not some good old honest prose with Stoichkov, with a Romario. There's no star there. There's no star in those two teams. They're all excellent. And this is where European football, I think, is going. You can't have a couple of gods and feed them the Maradona 86, either through Argentina or Napoli to maybe a lesser extent. You have to have athleticism and technique everywhere. The game's changing, and it's a lesson that Rangers couldn't quite grasp because we could only afford and could only play because of formal rule 2 or 3 gods. So, but you just isolated. You're so easy to play against when you're so heavily reliant on a couple of supremely talented players. And I think just in terms of the 22 players that take to the field in the Champions League or European Cup final, I'm willing to listen to offers for a stronger 22 than that.
Well, it's also, I think, someone might come up with a point in time team that could rival it, maybe. But every single one of the players has either had a great career, is currently a great player, or would go on to be a great player as well, which I don't know if you're ever beaten that. So I think that makes it's aged very, very well. It was fantastic at the time, but it is aged ridiculously too, which I think is quite unique.
The final, more like Munich in '93 than Athens the year before. Capello, nearly Capello's it's tight. And again, Ajax are nowhere near as we will at PSG, nowhere near as kind of expressive and fun. But it's a final, right? I mean, it's so important. And all the big talk about expression, but you got to walk that walk when the actual night comes. And it is a bit bitty. Again, the chances are not huge. I remember at the time being slightly disappointed as a 14-year-old watching it. And then there's a moment, 5 minutes to go. And quite a nice moment, I guess, when you've got Frank Rijkaard, who's, I guess, a libero, up at the edge of the box, linking play, and a beautiful ball in to the 18-year-old future of Dutch football, Patrick Kluivert. It's actually quite a spawny kind of goal. He's got a toe poke just into that bottom corner, just away from Rossi. And Rijkaard, of course, who had won this thing with Milan and had scored in the final, I'm sure, against Benfica, being involved and kind of finishing off that part of his career, and the old generation and the new linking up. I guess a kind of fitting way to end the final, but not the greatest 90 minutes we've all seen, despite what I've just said about these brilliant players all being on the team sheet, cancelling each other out, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Capello saw what happened to Bayern clearly and went, yeah, that's not happening to us. So not that it ever probably would have, like you said, the strength there that they've got. Another one of those. There's a sort of chance in the first half, one of those near post headers for Frank de Boer. Donadoni and Marco Simone had some decent chances for Milan in the first half. I think maybe on balance, Milan might have had the better of the opportunities in the 85 minutes. If you like, there's a really funny moment when you're watching it back. I don't know if this is something that people were aware of or not, but Desai nearly kicks Litmanen's head off at one point with a high foot, and Van Gaal mimics it on the touchline. Has anyone seen this? He's raging.
Does Louis.
He's raging, but it's so funny. He actually said he said they couldn't hear, so there was no point shouting at the referee. But doing something extravagant like that, he thought it would influence the officials, and he said it worked. I don't know if that was in this game or future or not, but yeah, some mind games going on there. But again, interesting point. We've spoken about Desai's role again earlier in the series, and then Littmanen last week. So pretty cool to see them line up together. And I think this is a big part of the game. As great as Littmanen was, he was pretty poor in this game. Apparently he'd been ill for most of the week. But I do think Desai was a big part of his sort of non-event, not a sniff at all. But it did come, I think, with a bit of a consequence, because Desai did a man marking job on Littmanen. Capello was like, no, just go and follow him about. It left Rijkaard with a lot of space in the middle to really sort of put his foot in the ball, like we said, and dictate.
And then Desai can't do what he did a year before. Maraud around and do his
thing. He had to be not even disciplined, because he was out of position, but he had to be disciplined in that task, absolutely. But then again, Rob, to your point, Boban and Donadoni were sort of the wider centre midfielders, if you like, but they had to keep fairly defensive to sort of guard against those sort of Ajax counter-attacks. Those direct passes, you watch their games, and Ajax are so direct with the ball, direct with their running, but they're not scared to get the ball forward and get into the feet of the forwards and the wingers. So that was really interesting from that point of view. Rijkaard apparently at halftime made a speech. I think it in either the last game of his career or the second last. I'm not sure if there was they went out the cup, but I think there might have been a league game after that, and then he retired. So what a way, I guess, to go out. But he made a speech at halftime, and it was apparently quite rousing. One of the interesting things, again, to sort of go back to an earlier thread, was Milan used Daniel Massaro and Marco Simoni to press two of Ajax's three defenders at that point as much as possible to stop them playing out from the back, try and stop them, try and cut off the space. The issue that they had was Edwin van der Sar basically playing as a fourth defender in a significantly more advanced way than, like I said, when we discussed Rossi last week. Massaro and Simone go and close down Blind and Frank de Boer, for example. They'll put the ball back to Van der Sar, quite happy just clipping the ball 15, 20 yards over their heads to Michael Reisiger, and off they go and start their build up. So I think it was a bit cagey. I think Capello clearly was wanting to get. I actually think if this wonderful move for the goal that we'll come on to hadn't happened, it was 100% going to penalties. Which
it was.
I don't know, David. I'd be interested on that one, because again, that then becomes a lottery, and it's Italian precision, I guess, over the Dutch, who are not the best in the penalties.
I think
fancy a couple of those Italians after what happened in Los Angeles. You know?
That's the interesting thing. I mean, Maldini lost 3 tournaments, or went out of 3 tournaments without. Famously without losing the tie. So there was maybe an element there. No, I think from about 70 minutes, I thought this is penalties. And then, when it happens, and it happens late, and it almost felt like a fitting goal to win it. Great striker's goal, but probably not one that, is going to make goal of the month with the lightning seeds buzzing in the background that particular month.
So, being a massive dork, I liked it, and I liked it for a couple of reasons. First of all, Kanu and Kluivert, really positive subs. Let's just go and get this Littmanen coming off, who wasn't great, as we said. They loved 1-2s on the edge of the box. You watch the goals, I think, in the earlier group stage Milan game. There's a 1-2 where Kluivert sticks it through the legs of Franco Baresi, and De Boer scores. It's that sort of clipped finish that he did over the keeper. They loved it. That sort of third man run concept that we've heard about so much was massive for them. So what I liked about this one was a little bit of passing about. I think it goes to Davids, and then maybe over Mars on this side, and then they work it back into the middle for Rijkaard. He just plays that pass into Kluivert as he'd done a million times before, and Kluivert said after it, normally you would return the ball to Frank, because it's Frank Rijkaard, of course you would. But he said he just decided, I'm just going to take it myself, and he just turned, and I think that caught everybody off the hook. Milan, he gets away from Baresi, scores that famous toe poke, and watching it back, I think Costa Curta's actually predicting that Rijkaard run, and he's dropped. Weirdly enough, he's dropped, which keeps Kluivert onside, and he's dropped to sort of counter, I think, the ball come to Rijkaard so he can take that block. So what Kluivert has done is just completely outfoxed them all. So he's predicting that, and he's just turned around and yeah, it's a toe poke. But I really like the sort of the way that came about, and I think it's a fitting goal, I think, to win this, and it summed them up. I think that bravery in attack, along with that sort of methodical approach to things. So yeah, I think it was not the best final for the purists, but there were certainly bits of it that I found very interesting, and like you said, the legacy of both teams is definitely up there.
Yeah, there's a couple of things just to talk about before we wrap up. At the time, either it wasn't guaranteed that the Dutch would have, as they did in 94-95, a guaranteed group stage participant. They would be automatically seeded in the group stage. And I think that was maybe on the verge. So I think basically Ajax had to win the final in order to definitely be in the group stage the next season, and people were losing their mind over that. How could this possibly be? That we wouldn't see this. Europe's kind of losing the run of itself. Where's European football kind of going? And as we're going to discuss, I guess, over the next few weeks, Adam, this team, there's no huge legacy in Amsterdam, because the football is going to change. They will be in next year's final, but it's a slightly different team, and then it all disintegrates. Most of it is shipped over to Barcelona, I suppose. But again, the strength of Dutch football to be able to, take this and then run, real European football for the next 4 or 5 years, for example, as they possibly could have done 20 years before. Just isn't a possibility anymore. The Ajax are huge, but Holland isn't, and that's maybe the story of where we are in 1995
and 2019 when they tried to repeat the trick and they got picked off again. Yeah, like I said, probably easy looking back to think they just appeared fully formed this season and blew everyone away. But it was a 4 or 5 year process, step by step, bringing through players, smart signings, etc. It's interesting now, these first 3 years that we've done, it has been the demise of 3 teams in 3 years. It's been Barcelona getting brought down to earth sharply, and then obviously you've got Milan here as well, and then, as we'll come on to, it'll be Ajax. So we've been spoiled at the start, I think, in terms of seeing a great team, but there isn't that longevity at all. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to start to pick that away, and the financial disparity was probably here at this time. It's only Ajax and Porto that have ever won the Champions League, isn't it, from outside the top 5 leagues? Yeah, and even then, Germany and Italy don't exactly have lots and lots of winners, and France have only got that one with Marseille. So I think it shows that it was the case at this point. Different reasons, obviously, Bosman, as we'll come on to, and they are getting players picked off of them. Maybe if that hadn't come in, they might have been able to keep it around a little bit longer. So that's maybe a unique circumstance, but yeah, certainly not 10, 15 years later. So yeah, I think it's a nice bookend. We spoke about sort of Gothenburg in the last show, and them ending here. You've got Frank Rijkaard, who was massive in the European Cup and the Champions League. This is his last season. Good for him to get that Champions League win, because he missed it the year before. And also Daniel Massaro, I think, again, we've spoken about him a fair bit. His last game for Milan, 10 great years. He said after that final, 10 great years ended where we won everything and we wrote pages of history in world football. So I think that sort of sums that up for Milan. This is the last time we'll see them for
we'll speak about it as well. Talk about it just slightly moment. Rob, sorry.
No, and it's worth repeating, of course, the obvious, but sorry to forget, Milan had to win that game to qualify next year, didn't they? Because they haven't won the league. I was going to ask, my memory for this isn't great. At the time when Ajax won, given the age profile of the team by 1 or 2 players, do any of you remember whether people thought there would be another dynasty like in the 70s? Because this is a few months before the Bosman ruling, isn't it? So I know money's becoming more of a factor, but does anyone remember what the move was like?
I think they would have assumed
we don't know yet that this Champions League will take over 20 years before it's retained.
Yeah.
So I think it'll still be in
exactly.
people's heads that you'll get your Ajax, then Bayern, then Liverpool, and we've just been through a kind of era with Milan where teams just own it for a few years and then they pass it over to someone else. So I think they probably would have assumed that. I don't think we understood what Bosman and TV markets are.
No,
going to
they
do.
hadn't, and I think there was definitely a sense of we are now set for this young team. Even in the commentary, it's mentioned this young team could be set to rule for a number of years, and you accepted that maybe one or two would go to Italy. That had always happened with a successful team, but the idea that the team would be systematically picked apart within a year and really be left with virtually none. No, I really don't think that was in people's mind, because Ajax are they became almost the default model for the bad side of the Bosman ruling, which is they got picked apart, particularly by Milan and Juventus, who then sold all the players after 6 months and made a fortune. And that was when UEFA were forced to bring in the 3 clubs in one season rule. And it was because of this Ajax team. So I certainly my recollection of it is, from World Soccer and 4-4-2, this team could we could be set for a Milan-style spell where they're winning.
And to be fair,
that would make sense.
We'll get to in a couple of weeks, but the penalties away from retaining it. I mean, it's not as if it completely collapsed. Sorry.
Yeah, you'll get to, but they the end of this year, 95, they had a diabolical, I think, 5-day period. The Bosman ruling goes through, and Overmars fucks his knee.
Yeah,
and before that, they've been amazing. I mean, you'll talk about, I'm sure, the Real Madrid game, but that's you do have to wonder if that doesn't happen to Overmars, whether they win it again. I don't think that would have changed in the longer term, because I think people still would have gone to Italy, like you say, but they could quite conceivably have won 2 in a row without Overmars, never mind with him.
Adam, one final word from you before we wrap up. This is Milan done. They have dominated this competition. 3 times winners, 2 other finals in the last 6 years. Sorry. No more Milan in the final until 2003. Capello, who seems to be right at this moment, if you're talking on the eve of the Vienna final in 1985, one of the best managers of the world, will be around. I don't think he's in the final again. I don't think for the rest of the rest of the Champions League. I guess we knew that Baresi, this definitely was a kind of final journey. America looked maybe just a step too far, perhaps, certainly when he was stepping on an injured leg already. But how quickly these things just end, and that's it. What kind of odds would you get not to see Milan in a European final for 8 years?
Yeah, especially again to say, by the way, this Ajax team are going to disappear off the face of the earth within about 18 months, and also Milan won't be back for that. You just wouldn't at all. So yeah, I mean, it's been really, really great looking back over them. Like I said, I really enjoyed that early Capello years when he'd just taken over from Saki, and he had sort of melded the both. It was quite complete. I think he melded both of those sort of styles together. They're now at that stage, where they are maybe just starting to get a little bit over the hill, and it's not as if we're going to replace them with someone ridiculously subpar. It's Juventus up next, isn't it, for the Italian contingent? And they didn't have some. They had some pretty good players as well, so we're going to get a few more famous faces coming in.
Yes. They had three finals in a row. They had some great players and some suspiciously fit ones.
Yeah, they worked very hard. Anyway, that'll do it. Thank you, Rob, for your double shift over the last couple of weeks. I'm sure you'll be back when it's more entertaining nights.
He'll be back for 99. Come on, we all know it.
Yeah, I can't resist that.
David Edgar, thank you.
An absolute pleasure. A joy to listen to you all, lads. Thank you.
Cheers.
And climbing down from his lectern, thank you, Adam.
Just a big exhale there. That's me done what I needed to do here. So yeah, no, that was really, really enjoyable. Thanks, Rob, for coming on as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
It was brilliant. It was a pleasure.
We're into 95, 96. Next time, again, some new faces on the Champions League roster. Real Madrid, of course, what a history they've had in the old tournament. Borussia Dortmund from Germany. Adams mentioned Juventus and Blackburn Rovers. They got representing St George. Rangers in the Champions League back again. Don't get too excited. But until next time, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.